All right, we are on. So I want to thank everyone for tuning in for this specific podcast on Civil Conversations with Matt Aguito. We are going to focus on women and in ministry. And the reason why I say women and in ministry is I want to talk about women that are in ministry and have been in ministry for numbers of years. And we'll be talking with three women right now. They're returning guests, actually. And also women and ministry, just from the perspective of what is their role in ministry, and I can share a little bit about that as well. So I have Khan, who joined me on the Asian American episode a few weeks back. So I was glad to have her back. Rosalie Norman, who was actually just on almost a couple weeks ago for the Christian politics and race episode of Civil Conversations, and Lisa Brown, who was on with me when it came to beauty, image, and colorism with the African American women. Each one of these women I've either known for years, like I've known with Lisa, or just met, is like I did with Rose and Khan, have been very impactful, even just to me in this long and short time, and also to the viewers that's listened to them before. And I believe they have a wealth of knowledge that they can offer to us. So thank you, ladies, for joining me again. Part of why I wanted to have this conversation or the main reason why I want to have this conversation is that I find that women have, growing up in the church, I'll be 40 next year. Women have had so many different roles. And you can go back even in biblical days, right, where women have so many roles when it comes to Christianity and the church. But then there were some times when I was growing up in the organized church that there was a bit of a struggle, right, with what was a woman's role. Either it was, a woman can or can't be a pastor, or you had like a woman is supposed to lead in children's ministry and not in X ministry, and all these different things. Or you had some women who had expectations of them that they just didn't want. Like sometimes the pastor's wife does not want to lead the women's ministry, but some people expect them to. But with you three, you guys have been in this for such a long time, and I'll let you guys introduce yourselves individually, and I'll just call everyone out. So I would love to hear about your own experiences. What has it been like being a woman in ministry? Give us a little bit of background on your history in ministry, and then move forward from there. So yeah, I would like to actually start with Lisa, if she's okay with that. Um,
Sure.
Lisa Brown. Yeah, just go ahead and give us a little bit of history of yourself.
Yeah. So I think in a previous episode, I let you guys know that I actually was brought up in the South. And so in the South, everyone went to church. The town I was in, everyone went to church. It was predominantly Baptist. There was some Methodist, and then there were some Pentecostal, but the mainstream religion was Baptist, and it's a segregated town. So what I'm telling you is I grew up in African American Baptist churches. Okay. Up until 20s, I went to college. And again, I still, on Sundays, they had a bus that came and got us and they fed us. So I
Mm.
went to just, didn't want to break tradition. So I did that. And it wasn't until my late 20s, I want to say mid to late 20s, when I got out of college and I was working and on my own, that I chose my own religious and theological path. And so, again, I think I moved to Philadelphia, and that's where I actually became a member of a non denominational church. And within that non denominational church, a pastor approached me and asked me to shepherd a group of women. And so I started shepherding those women, and I realized I didn't know what I was doing. And and I was way in over my head. And it just so happened that there was a seminary. At the time, it was Biblical Theological Seminary. Now it's Missio Seminary in Philadelphia, around the corner from where I had bought a townhouse. So I was curious, and I just got married. Michael was curious, and he went there, and he said, "Hey, do you know there's a seminary there?" And we said, "No." And we're like, "Ah." So I just took a couple of classes because, like I said, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know these women had some very rich and deep issues. And I think I was like 31 or 20. I can't even remember. And I'm like, yeah. And my pastor just kind of threw me in there. And so that's how I actually started going to seminary. I didn't know what I was doing. And I took a couple of classes. I think the first class I took may have been on, I don't know, some book of the Bible. I don't even remember. I didn't have a curriculum. And so I went there, and from that, I got interested and I decided to go into an MDiv path. And I can tell you that at that time, like I said, that was in the 90s, 2000. Yeah, I was the only, I want to say I was probably the only female, or very few females. I know I was the only African American female. I remember a Russian female I had. We had Greek together. But very few females on the MDiv path, because the MDiv path implied you were going into a pastorate role. So yeah, I struggled. I mean, I did not struggle through that as far as academically, but as far as just men, all my classes were with men. But this is the thing, I excelled. I am a math major, an analytical major. So Greek and Hebrew and all that was easy for me. And I think the professors were like, what the is going? She's interpreting this stuff. She's like, what the heck? So
I need to call you whenever somebody's speaking in tongues, I guess, in Hebrew, and then we can translate.
So I got through all that, but I think people, yeah, I know they did, looked at me very precariously because I was getting an MDiv. And at the same time, this is what's funny, my husband was not getting an MDiv. So every church we went to, every experience we had, a lot of our friends, we were often looked at as the weird couple, the wife's getting the MDiv and the husband's not, and she's trying to, take over the house and all that kind of stuff. And so yeah, I had to work through that and find my place of, what does God want for me? Because ultimately what I learned, anything you want to do in ministry, it has to be a calling for it. So once you work that out with God and you understand what your calling is, you have to ignore all the noise. And that's what I had to get to. And it did. Yeah, it took a lot of, it was a lot of praying, a lot of talking to people. A lot of pastors resented me because I excelled and I was getting an MDiv, and they weren't just, people, there, and some of you, I don't know, Con and Rose, if it's even just working. I mean, I worked and got my MDiv at the same time. And, people will look down on women because they work and think they're devils. So I've been through all of that, but I'm comfortable with who I am with God and what he wants me to do. So, but it's challenging.
No, that's good. That's really great background. And then, before we move on, I'm actually going to just peg you, Con, you're up next. But a lot of what you said was critical there. One of the things that caught my attention was the you getting an MDiv, Michael not getting an MDiv, and then you looking like you're going to start running a family. It's amazing how some of what we will call the worldly aspect of things, like, like if a woman is getting her master's degree or a doctorate or so on and so forth, and the husband's like a blue collar worker. I'm just using that example. That's not saying that's the case with Michael, but then it's like, oh, well, she's wearing the pants in the family. It carried over into the church when it comes to like a title or a degree or whatever. But it's funny because I can easily see that being something then, but I don't know if it's that huge of a deal now. So like if a young lady comes up now, I don't know if we see them the same way. So it's good. It's good that you had the experience. It's bad, obviously, it was frustrating, but it's good because I guess you can mentor and be an example for the young women who are coming up now who want to do the same thing and not second guess themselves. So I think that's great. And we'll definitely come back to you a bit more. So Con, you mind sharing us a bit of your history from a ministry standpoint?
Yeah, thanks, Matt, for having me back on your show.
It's great to have you.
So I grew up with, charismatic church, Vietnamese church, very patriarchal, the culture is. And then also a church that was probably like, and the pastor who was probably like the bastion or the capital of complementarianism, right? And in the church, and a very conservative Bible college that worshipped this pastor, basically. And so I was very much in that mentality that, women should not be head pastors or elders of churches. They have their certain role and men have their certain role. And I just kind of bought into it. After college, I went to be a missionary. Well, my first gig was a high school teacher, and when I graduated from Bible college, I wanted just to teach the word and like counsel youth, and I got a position right away, paying me $16,900 a year. Believe it or not, I think it was below poverty, these Christian high schools, but
wow,
I was a Bible teacher and a counselor, youth counselor. And then I call that my dark year. I could not handle high school students. So I went back on the mission field with YWAM, and it's much more egalitarian, like pro-women mission agency. And I remember one speaker talking about, telling me, Khan, you have gifts, so don't let anybody stop you. And he was talking about women in ministry. So I took that to heart, but then when I left the mission field after a while, I went back to the conservative college that I had attended to work as the director of a short-term missions program and local outreach, and eventually became the associate director of campus ministries. So I did that full time for 10 years. And during that time, I went to seminary at a college that was a little bit less conservative, right down the road. And they were very more egalitarian than the college I worked at. So that I had this woman professor, and I never had women Bible professors in my college, and I loved her. She was a great teacher. So I didn't really struggle as much in the seminary with women issues, but it was more race issues, because I think I was the only Asian woman there, and there weren't very many students of color. So graduated from there, but back at the college I was working at, there was still the debate there, like, should women be leaders and blah, blah, blah. And everyone was angry about it. If there was, I remember Brenda Salter McNeil, and I call her like the mother of racial reconciliation. She came in and she preached, and she
I think I've heard of her.
You need to read her books and look her up.
I actually think it took me a second, and I was like, oh, I think I heard of her. Okay, go ahead. I'll definitely.
So she can preach. Oh my gosh, she can preach. And so this is a chapel in college. So it's okay, because it's not a church, right? It's a college. So women can come and preach in a college. And so at one point she swore in in her sermon, and she said, now some of you have more problems with, what did she say? Something like, you have more issues with me being a woman preacher than that I just swore. And she kind of let that rip. Oh, interesting. And so, that was the whole debate back then. And anyway, again, my issues there at the college, I think, were more about race and me, and as an Asian in a very white space, along with being a woman. Okay. And so after that, I actually started being an adjunct professor at that college and started teaching. And then again, I said, I know this college is complementarianism. So what are you going to say if, male students come and have an issue with me? And so the head of the Bible department at that time said, well, we're not a church, so it's okay. Okay, that we can have a woman Bible professor.
Yeah.
So I never really had too many issues with me as a ministry professor. I've taught race and culture there, but the theology there was very, very conservative. Okay, and so I taught courses more like missions and ministry rather than straight Bible classes. So now, go ahead.
Do you find that? I'm sorry, I mean to stop you in the story, but I'm curious. Do you find that? And maybe this is something that happened with you, Lisa, and definitely you, Rose. Do you find that because of the knowledge you gain and you're speaking from the word and it's theologically sound and someone could try to pull out a Bible verse and be like, let me make sure that she's saying this right. And then it's like, well, she's right. So does that kind of just like in any area you earn the respect and it's just like the problems go away? I don't know if that makes sense what I'm saying, but like, is that what happened, do you think, over time? Like the more you spoke and taught and were exposed, you just saw less resistance?
I don't know that I've ever really encountered resistance in that way. I've more encountered resistance when I teach my race courses. Okay. So
yeah, everyone wants to fight that one. Yeah.
kind of more where I'm at now, my focus more is on, race and culture. I work with African refugees. Pastor Rose is one of my pastors at Sanctuary Covenant Church, and I have my own business called C3 Cultural Competency Consulting that I'm trying to build up. So I'm focused more on not so much the women issue, but the race issue. But later on, I'll let Pastor Rose go. But later on, I will tell you a little bit more about some of the struggles I had at this particular church, very conservative, the capital of complementarianism.
Yeah.
And now my present struggles at this conservative college that I'm teaching at as an Asian woman and raising my voice. So
no, that I can't
there's a
wait.
little teaser there.
I can't wait to hear that. Definitely. So Rose, if you don't mind, go ahead and give us a bit of your history. Thank you, Con.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for inviting me. And so good to hear your story, Lisa, and of course to hear more from Con. Just so appreciate you. So let's see, I grew up in a largely homogenous, all white community in a small town in Minnesota. And I grew up, my mother taking me to church. My father had a pretty poor kind of experience growing up in the church, very conservative, fundamental upbringing. And so it was very damaging for him. And so he didn't participate in faith formation when I was a child. So my mom was the one who took us to church, my brothers and I, and I grew up in the Catholic faith. So, obviously in the Catholic tradition, it is only men. However, I grew up in a very unique parish. The parish that I grew up in was, even though, of course, it was patriarchal and the priest was a man, of course. There was a lot of women who were strong leaders in our parish in ways that was really formative for me. I went to a Catholic school, and so some of our teachers, including our principal, were nuns, and they were some of the most devout followers of Jesus I've ever met. They were not your stereotypical mean nuns who were strict. I mean, they were just so full of faith. I remember my old nun. She was like my maybe second grade teacher. I remember her dancing up and down the aisles during Mass and just worshiping. So I think I grew up in a pretty unique.
I don't know why the
Catholic
visual of Sister Mary Clarence from Sister Act is like popping in my head, and it's like Whoopi Goldberg just going up and down, like. Yeah, that's cool. That's a great story. Keep going.
Yeah. Yep. So I grew up, and even the nuns were so they were so courageous in how they exemplified their faith and share that. And so I got to see that, and that was really formative for me. It wasn't until it was later in junior high. We were on I think it was like a confirmation or like pre-confirmation retreat, and we were praying, which, I mean, getting seventh graders to just sit and pray in a pew, I mean, that's a miracle right there. But I remember vividly, seventh grade, sitting in this pew, looking up at the pulpit and hearing distinctly from God that one day my job would be in full-time ministry in the church. And I mean, right away, I was like, God, what does that even mean? What does that even look like? How can I even do that when I've never seen a woman in that pulpit before? I've never seen a woman, administering communion, all these different things. So it became, and that was at a young age, obviously. And so it became a question and kind of just an openness of, God, I know that this is a calling and I'm going to take it seriously, but I don't know what it means yet. And so I'm just going to keep the question there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to keep trying to grow in my faith. Again, I was young. I didn't know what this meant at the time, but just keeping an openness. And God was, of course, as God is, faithful and really revealed along my faith journey, shown me women who were faithfully adhering to their call. I also saw God's faithfulness in just pointing me to different churches or denominations. Once I was in college, I did end up leaving the Catholic faith and went to a Protestant church. I was a part of the denomination that I'm a part of now and ordained in. It's called the Evangelical Covenant Church. And they've been ordaining women since, I think, 1976. So it's been a while. And so it was there that I met incredible women who not only were affirmed in ministry, but affirmed in ministry in all levels of leadership in the church. And so that was really powerful for me. I went to North Park Seminary in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And I received a bachelor's in biblical and theological studies. And for a while, I was just kind of like still a little resistant to the call to ministry, because I thought, like, this is still kind of unknown, and I'm more I'm more introverted, and I thought, like, I don't think a pastor can be those things, so I don't think I can actually do this, or I have to change who I am to be able to live into this call, which of course I realize I don't have to do. But I remember it was my mother, who's a devout Catholic, came and visited me one weekend at college, and we were walking, around North Park's campus and showing her around different, buildings and such. And we came to the seminary because they have a seminary associated with the college. And she looked at that building and she said, "Well, what's that?" And I said, "Well, that's the seminary." And I said, "That's where, people go to be trained to be pastors." And she looked at me and she said, "Well, that's where you belong." Wow. And it was a really powerful moment of because I always describe it as, I don't think I needed my mother's approval, but it certainly was a moment that the Holy Spirit spoke very clearly again to affirm that this was a calling. So then I went on to Fuller Seminary in Pasadena, California. And both North Park and Fuller fully support women in ministry. In fact, Fuller requires their faculty to sign a statement stating that whether they believe, biblically or not, the affirmation of women in ministry, they will support their female students. And so I had a wonderful experience at Fuller in that area. And Fuller really was where I asked the questions of, what's the debate on women in ministry? What is egalitarianism versus complementarianism, etc.? And I'd say, for maybe certainly those 3 years, that was like the main question that I was trying to answer in seminary. I took every Christian feminist class. I took every womanist class that I could possibly, find. And like, that was my emphasis while I was there. So yeah, that's a little bit about my story. And then went on to lead at Sanctuary Covenant Church in Minneapolis. I was hired at the time as the director of children's ministry. I was in that role for about 8 or 9 years, and now, and then I was associate pastor of family ministry, and now associate pastor of formation. And I was ordained in the Covenant Church maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So
wow. No, that's great history. And I also just like you sharing how you probably didn't need the confirmation, but you got the confirmation, and just how the Holy Spirit worked in that, I think is like really dope. And I also, it's funny I say really dope. I don't know, I can't let go of slang. But the thing that I really like about all of your stories in some cases, it's like, so for me, I'm in IT, right? So I grew up in the church, but I have my career or aspirations were in ministry from a structural standpoint, right? At least I know you understand this because you're in IT also. But like, I always love hearing stories of people, men or women, right, that take the time to study to get theological based degrees and then start to work in ministry and so on and so forth. From an IT standpoint, like I'll be 40 in a few months, and I always think about how when I came in, I feel like I don't want to say I paved the way, but sometimes I look at these guys in their 20s, their early 20s, and I'm like, yeah, I have no idea what it's like to have nothing but a keyboard, no mouse, right? Like it's just kind of I have, when I say that to now kind of like parallel that to when I listen to your stories, it's like I don't know if you would say y'all paved the ways, but you definitely went through some things that maybe some young women are not going to have to go through at all, because even in your own careers, or sorry, not careers, career/ministry, it's almost like you've graduated from this is what we talked about to my new struggle is this. So that also means that for some young women, those your old struggles are never a struggle for them. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't mentor young women from that perspective. Maybe you guys know that. And I can use that to kind of pivot. And please, like, chime in. I had, by the way, I had muted you guys individually just in case, but chime in at any point. But I want to pivot to, and anyone can take this one. Lisa, if you want. I know you've been kind of chilling there for a little bit. But what were the challenges that may have occurred? And you touched it a little bit, obviously, when it came to just some of the way people looked at you, that may have occurred at the time that just like, that I don't know if it made you question it, but just more of like what made it harder for you at those certain times before you started realizing like it was no longer a struggle anymore. Yeah.
For me. All right. So a couple of things. I knew I wasn't called to be a pastor in a church. I'm called to
Okay.
be more of a leader. And yeah, my next thing is to hopefully I wanted to start a either coaching, counseling agency. That's where I am now, actually trying to get that going. So the struggles I had more than anything was when I was going to school and finishing and working. I think people saying, well, what are you going to do with an MDiv? You can't be a pastor. I think that was a struggle. I think within church, well, the church that I was in at the time, I was probably one of the few people getting an MDiv. So even my pastor, my pastor's wife, some ministry leaders looked at me somewhat, I think with contempt, to be perfectly honest. But I mean, that was a time I prayed for. I mean, I prayed for them. I loved them. That was then. But I actually did end up going to another church out of that, and a church where actually one of my seminary professors, who was kind of on board with what I was trying to do. Some of you, he was into practical theology. So he was on board with what I want to do and what I want to do, and teach people how to take their biblical theology and make it practical in an everyday setting. So he's on board with that. And so I actually ended up going to his church because I wanted to see him within the seminary, within school, and within practice to learn. So that church more was aligned with my vision, and it had a lot more women leaders. And so that was where I was comfortable. So the lesson, I guess, what I'm saying about that is you have to be comfortable with your calling. You know what God called you to do. And sometimes you have to leave your comfort zone of maybe the church you're going to is where you have a lot of friends, you have relationships, you like the picnics, but God may be sending you somewhere else to learn and to minister, and you have to be comfortable with that. I have women friends, I think, who had to leave their, as you said, Rose, their denomination because they knew they were called, and they were just having such a struggle, and they were so uncomfortable, and they ended up going to another denomination. And that's okay. God doesn't tell us. He scatters the church all the time. He
Yeah.
does that all the time. He uses and he
Yeah.
scatters us. So that's fine. So I think we have to be comfortable with that. I think we have to be willing to understand, and this is where I think women's role is sometimes to be that trailblazer. I mean, when you look in the Bible and some of the examples, and you see some of the women, because it's like, what have I got to? They're stepping out and doing things, running to the tomb, just things that they're doing. So I think you have to see yourself sometimes as a trailblazer for God, and that's okay.
Yeah. And
That's fine. Yeah.
and it's wild because my perspective, my mom, and I don't think I shared this with any one of you all on the previous calls, but my parents are pastors and my wife's parents are pastors, so we are like Christian, right? And so uh so we didn't really have much of a choice. So I grew up a preacher's kid, even though my dad and my mom were more on the evangelistic. They were evangelistic leaders, and my mom was Sunday school superintendent at her church because I grew up Wesleyan before they became pastors. They became pastors when I got older, officially pastors when I got older. But I was always exposed to just women who were just, like you said, trailblazers. That's a really good word to use. And my mom being one of them first, right? And she just, everyone was like, Sister Lillian, which is her name. Like, you knew when she came in the door, she's going to handle it. And there's just this thing of an example of a strong woman, period, right? Being able, and when I say strong, not rude or disrespectful, just confident and just saying believing what God has called them to do and just executing. It's just beautiful. And then I had a weird shift. I moved to the South. So that was up in New York. Then I moved to the South. That doesn't necessarily, I moved to Virginia specifically. And I know it's still denominational in some areas as well. But I moved to the South, and it was just like, women have a place and this is where they need to stay. Now, granted, this was like in 98, 99. And I was like, really? Women have a place they need to stay? Like, I didn't have that paradigm. My paradigm, women could do whatever the heck they wanted in the church, right? So it was so weird to see it scattered. And so I appreciate you sharing, and Lisa, and now of course Rose, you touched on this too. It's like when you leave a church or denomination, you're following your calling, right? And it's just, that's it. A denomination is not gonna stop your calling, no matter what it is. I think that's great. Sorry, Lisa, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just thought.
Oh no, I was curious to know what denomination was that. In your mom, what denomination?
Oh, well, I grew up Wesleyan, so they didn't have a problem in pastors at all, like zero, at all. And then the church that I went to when I moved to the South, the pastor was, even though they says non-denominational, it was straight out of Kojic. So
yeah, you find that a lot. Yeah, you find that a lot. Baptists, women couldn't even
wear pants. Yeah. They couldn't, it threw me off. I was like, what's wrong with jeans? It's just jeans. I feel like it's easier. They can move around. I know it's easier for me. But yeah, just so you know. So that threw me off. Con, I know you had something you were going to share. I would love to hear that story that you gave us a little sneak preview on.
Oh, I have a few stories of kind of my journey and struggles with, I think the question was about struggles with male-dominated places and stuff. So when I was at this church that I call the bastion of complementarianism, before that I was helping with a church plant, and I was a worship leader in a Vietnamese American church plant. And my cousin was the pastor. And anyway, I left that church and went back to this other very conservative Baptist church. And I was part of this international Sunday school and small group. A lot of Asian, the small pocket of Asians that went to this church, in a very white, male-dominated church. And so the Sunday school leader, the worship leader, we would always sing a couple songs before we did our Sunday school lesson. He had asked me, he was going to be out of town, so he had asked me to lead a couple of songs one Sunday. So I did. And then the next week he came back and he said, the leader of the Sunday school asked me to tell you that you can't do that anymore because you're a woman. I said, okay, I can't lead 2 songs in a Sunday school. Wow. And then I was part of this small group, same international small group. And we had a lady leader, and she was a doctor, but she was a phenomenal Bible teacher and leader and facilitator, and could just draw out of the word and ask wonderful questions. And then, so lo and behold, the leadership of the church got wind that she was leading the Bible studies in our small group. And they said she couldn't do that. She could host it. But so then they put in these 2 really immature men that like were spreading like not blasphemy. I'm being dramatic, but like,
it wasn't. Here's a better way to say it. Here's another way to say it. It wasn't biblical. Theologically sound. Is that a safe way to? Okay, there we go.
Yeah, and the other guy was not so much biblically, but like emotionally immature and like not ready for leadership. And just because they were men, they were put into that situation. So anyway, I continued to go to that church, but through a broken engagement, I left that church. That's a side story. Good news is we got back together 2 years later. I'm still married to David after that. We still want to kill each other, but we got back together after our 2-year broken engagement. But so I left that church because there was another pastor. He was a Korean American pastor, and he had seen me in seminary at a workshop, and he was building a multi-ethnic church. And that was really the way I wanted to move. And so he kind of snatched me away from this church and said, hey, they have plenty of people there to lead that church. You come and help me, establish this church. And he really, I was still questioning the whole theology, right? And he helped me see that, leadership is based on gifting and maturity, not gender. So wow. I think that helped me just, there were little snippets that I was questioning this whole women can't be leaders and pastors. And so that I think just broke it way open. And so I just felt like I'm done with this debate, even though I'm still working in this very conservative college. I'm going to go to the next, topic of disagreement, race and ethnicity, from one controversial subject to another. Right. Right. Again, like I said, I was more, focus on that now, and which has now that intersection of race and gender has gotten me in a little bit of trouble now. And I feel like I remember when I was a teenager or 13, I grew up in a very traditional Vietnamese extended family. Now my mom was a single mom, and so she was much more progressive and a strong woman leader. But my cousins were always in the kitchen, cutting up these vegetables. And I just, I hated it. So one day they were like, come in the kitchen and help us. And I said, no, and I sat down on that couch and I had my first protest. I was going to sit down for all the Vietnamese women who were oppressed and expected to be in the kitchen. So at that young age, I feel like I had something in me that wanted to fight for justice, and equality. Because all the boy cousins were out playing soccer. And the girl cousins were always in the kitchen cooking, And so anyway, back to the intersection of Asianness and women, I feel like that has gotten me in trouble at my university because I spoke up in a faculty meeting and questioned the head of the Bible department about systemic racism in this institution. And I'm kind of in the midst of an HR complaint. I feel like there's probably like 4 Asian women, maybe 3 Asian women in as faculty in this college, and most of them that come through are kind of the stereotypical sweet, submissive, silent Asian women. And I was never sweet. I was never silent. Well, I can be shy, but I was just not that stereotyped sweet little, Asian.
Not a pushover.
Actually, I had to learn to discover my voice because I was very shy.
Okay.
But I've discovered my voice and I'm going to speak it. So I spoke it out in that faculty meeting. And so I felt like he retaliated. And so now I'm in this midst of this weird HR complaint. And I think I'm done with that, this white male institution that says they want to change racially and systemically, but it's just too slow for me. So anyway, so that is another racial and gender struggle because the head of the Bible department is a white male. Most of the Bible department are still white males. I think there's one African American professor, maybe one woman now.
Yeah, I think the way things are today, it's interesting because I don't want to say women's right has moved faster, or the way women are accepted in different areas moved faster. I don't know if that's the right term to use, but it's more mature than some of the racial issues. But I feel like, and this is where and y'all tell me because I'm not a woman, I feel like when you do take on certain things like race or class issues or political issues as a woman, then the women issue come back. Like, I don't know if that makes sense what I'm saying, right? Like, you're okay to do your job or do your thing as long as you don't touch these areas, right? And then and I'm saying that as a guy because you would hear things behind closed doors, or not even closed doors, even like the term microaggressions gets thrown around a lot, but I would say towards women where it's like, why is she like that? I'm like, well, the dude said the exact same thing like yesterday. You didn't say, why is he like that? Right. And so it's like we're at a point in time where women have all of the get all the paper, get all the credentials, get all the whatever. And then when they start to take on some of these more sensitive issues, the woman part comes back right in. Is like, well, should she even be saying any of this stuff? It's so weird, right? I don't know if y'all follow what I'm saying, but it's just.
Oh, yeah. Can I just give you one example of that? And before I say, Pastor Rose needs to tell you that she is earning her doctorate and she's doing her dissertation. So don't forget, don't be too humble, Pastor Rose, and tell them about that.
I want to hear about that because she's up next to tell me about her struggles, but I want to hear about that too.
Let me give you an example of that, Matt. And everyone's on Facebook lately, right? So I had this little discussion on Facebook, and what was the topic? Oh, I think I posted something about the Asian COVID, the anti-Asian racism during COVID. And so a white guy that I haven't seen since my teenage years posted, and can you tell me why that's racist to call it the Chinese flu or the Kung flu?
Oh, that whole thing, yeah.
So then other women were chiming in and trying to explain to him, and a little bit at a time, and he was getting super defensive and angry. And then a white male joins the conversation and has this long diatribe. It was really good. He's a husband of a therapist friend of mine who is a woman of color. And so I could tell it was her words coming out in this explanation of why you trigger when white males trigger women of color. They just tend to shut down if you're not emotionally mature, things like that. So anyway, and then all of a sudden he was like, oh, I understand now. And I was just like, 5 women, and mostly women of color, have said the exact same thing. And then all of a sudden this white guy comes in and he's not defensive anymore. And he's starting to get it like,
Wow. That I think, and this is, I have found myself in situations where, and it's probably because of my mom, right, where I would see that. Like I would literally hear a woman in a conference call or in a meeting, especially in IT. I'm a little older. Again, I said this several times before in IT. So when I was younger, there weren't as many women in what I was doing. So when a woman spoke, like you can easily see and hear like you can hear people intentionally not listening to them. It was the weirdest thing in the world. And then, so what I would do is I would turn around and say, so did you hear what so-and-so just said? And they were like, what do you mean? And that's how I would know they weren't paying attention to her, because they literally didn't hear what she said after, like she gave the answer. Like she gave the answer, she gave the solution, she told you exactly what to do. And then you still turn around and say, so what do you think is next for us to do? I'm like, she just said it. She just literally said it. And so I feel like as men, we have to do a much better job and it's frustrating, right? But we have to do a better job to continue to help defend and reaffirm, and I hate that we have to even repeat some things to help say, like, this is what basically the same thing Con just said, or same thing Lisa or Rose just said. So Rose, yeah, go ahead and what you got when it comes to some of the past struggles you had and all.
Yeah, well, I would say for me, the main one is perception. And I would say perception of both myself and how I've even pegged myself in the past, and then how other people have perceived me as a woman in ministry. I am I'm barely 5 foot tall. I'm petite. I'm younger, I'm 36, and very driven still. And so, I'm striving to have leadership roles at a young age. And so, after college, went to seminary right away. I didn't want to take time off. I wanted to continue on in studies. And I think for me, and also, as I shared, I'm an introvert. I had a perception of myself that because of all of these things, I had to prescribe to myself a particular sort of role. Because even though I was stating that I'm going to be consciously supportive of my calling, I actually subconsciously still perpetuated some of those unhealthy stereotypes. So, for example, when I was thinking about going into ministry, I thought, well, I better start in children's ministry because that's where you start as a woman, right? And so I perceived myself in a limited way. And I'm not saying that children's ministry is a limited role at all. But I certainly, again, pegged myself as, I think I'm supposed to go into it through this route first, because I'm going to be more accepted. I'm more likely to be, find a position, etc. And it was something I was passionate about. But again, I perceived myself in a particular way that was perpetuated by patriarchy, really. And even so, I even thought, a pastor is supposed to be, because, they're seen as this leader, well, then that means I have to be super bold. I have to be outspoken. I have to love being around people 24/7. And I realized, well, that's not necessarily who I am. And so those are actually liabilities. So I have to change myself, which is, of course, wrong. And I went through a lot of years in ministry trying to change who I was, because I was trying to fit this mold of who I felt kind of almost an empowered, powerful female pastor was supposed to be. I wasted a whole lot of time trying to be someone I wasn't. And it wasn't until we had an amazing senior pastor who was very similar to me, very similar. He had a very similar temperament and personality. And I realized, oh, these are actually, they're not a detriment. They're not a liability to ministry. They're an asset. And I can use these gifts, these characteristics that I hold, and they can absolutely enrich my vocation. And so I had to change my own perception of who I was, for sure, because I narrowed it for sure in the beginning. Then I would also say the struggles have been people's perception of me. Because often when I introduce myself at Sanctuary to new people, they probably think that I am not a person in a person in leadership. And often they're very surprised, like, oh, you're one of the pastors. Or after I preach, they'll say, wow, I got to be honest, I was not expecting, I hear this all the time of I wasn't expecting such, bold statements or bold teaching from someone of your stature, or whatever it might be,
Do you find that that has to do with it doesn't, I don't know, because I don't know if a small man would get the same kind of response. So I don't know if it's a size thing, or if it's do you think it was more on the woman side aspect and being okay, got you. Is that fall under this term gets thrown out there a lot, and I said it earlier, but do you find that being like a microaggression?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because they have a perception that because I'm young, I'm a female, I'm small, oh, she can't be a powerful preaching presence. And that's untrue. So, I've seen it in that. I've also seen it in microaggressions of, I'll preach and afterwards someone will say wow, that was an awesome sermon. But you know what Paul says about women preaching in the Bible, right? And your point, but I mean, those are comments that I've definitely heard, or at a past church, not at Sanctuary. I've raised my voice before in the past about inclusion of women, and then they shut me out of staff meetings. I wasn't invited again back to those. I'm like, well, all right.
Wow.
So there's definitely, still those power plays, of those aggressions for sure.
Wow. No, that's great. I find that, like, I love the perception examples you gave, because that's huge. And I do want to, emphasize one area of the example you gave when it comes to, like, children's ministry, like limits. I think you're right. Like, it's not necessarily mean that there's anything wrong with doing children's ministry. The limit isn't a height limit. It's a list limit. So, like, the list limit is, these are the things that women are typically okay with doing. Anything outside of this, oh, what are you doing over here? Right. That kind of feel. And you had to, you almost felt safer there because no one's going to say anything about it there. But then you moved away from that. Right. All of you, I mean, all three of you in your own ways have done that. And actually, just to kind of progress this a little bit further, and Lisa, I'm going to touch on you on this because you mentioned something about and I'm sorry if I'm about to misquote you. You said a consulting firm that you want to get into. So before you respond, one thing I love is, about the three of you guys is that you're progressive, right? And that, again, another term that gets thrown out there, but like you're always looking ahead, right? And again, it's why I wanted y'all back, because I'm listening, I'm like, oh my God, like these women are freaking awesome. And what you're doing as you guys are moving forward and not really, I mean, obviously you have the microaggressions and some of the issues you've described, but they're not, actually from the jump, this never really stopped you guys. I mean, you had your first protest, Con, when you were a little kid and, protest against the kitchen. So I get it. But for you, Lisa, and then of course, Rose and Con, you guys can speak to this more because of what you're doing already. Lisa, you want to start something in consulting. Can you explain what that is and just how does that look going forward, and tell us your vision?
Sure.
I mean, like, I would love to hear this.
Sure.
And maybe after this, how do we help you?
Yeah, I would. Yeah. Something I've always known is that church and being a Christian is perplexing. And it really is. Most of us want to be part of a church body, most of us, but it can be perplexing. It can feel judgmental. And the other thing is church has a lot of issues. And like I listened to Con and Rose, and you were talking about the issues with racism and sexism. But something I think that I came to the realization of is, why would we expect anything differently when, if you really think about it, some of you, if you've been in church all your life, have you ever been to a class that talked about racism and actually used theology to teach and to convict on how we can get out of that loop, out of that sin? Has anyone ever actually sat and had a small, taught on sexism? I mean, really taught.
Inside church? Like, not outside, like
yes,
at a school.
inside church. Yeah,
inside the church?
No, I'm talking about church. Yeah, I'm talking about church. Have you ever had that class? And I mean, we have classes all the time on marriage. I mean, there's a theology of marriage within the church, right? You have classes on that. We have classes on relationships. We have classes on money management. But those are issues that no one has ever taken a deep dive and really taught on it. And that's kind of what my vision is teaching that and making it as mainstream to churches as teaching on a theology of marriage, teaching on a theology of giving, teaching. And so the people that we are expecting, we're talking about, our pastors and our elders, and we have all these expectations, but really they're unrealistic expectations. If you think about the environments they've come up in and the schools they've come up in, and have they really been taught about how to integrate their church? How to be anti-racist within a theological setting? No, I've never heard it. Maybe you have. I mean, not really taking a theology about it. And so that's along the lines of what I want to do. But also the consulting, it'll have, right now we're looking at 3 to 4 different pieces. And one is the church piece, where we go in and teach the church leaders and really do an extensive, teaching them about, diversity and anti-racism and all of these things, because really the church, a lot of it, they see it as social justice. And a lot of evangelicals, Christians have been taught that social justice is a bad word. You know, you hear that and you can't marry that with theology. But I don't think they've really been taught from the Bible what that looks like and how to do that. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is just, we're going to call it real talk, or EEL talk, where people, I believe there are tons of people out there that need guidance. Just like Con, you were talking about something you had just gone through on your job. And I think you would love to have someone, a racial counselor or consultant, that could tell you how to come back to that and handle that in a Christian way, but also in a way that gets you, I don't want to say justice, but that's, I feel like, I was going to say Christian justice, if you will. I think you need to tell somebody how to go through that whole situation where, you know, you were done wrong. And how do I handle this? And how do I, you know, do this? I think you need to have, you know, I think people need help with that. I think there are people that are leading organizations that every day they come up on something that's a challenge. You know, it could be a white male, white female, African-American male, and they come up on something and they're like, you know, I have this situation and there's this African-American male and I don't want to say something because I'm scared I'll be thought of as racist, but they need help there. And that's a little bit of a vision of what we plan to do is, you know, in anything you need help with, I think everybody, you have to get, it comes in 3 or 4 different ways. One is some people they can just hear a sermon. So that's the going into church and teaching the big picture. Some people need to be in a smaller group to learn. And then some people need one-on-one. And we plan to do all of those. We're trying to get our platform together and decide the best way to do it. And my husband is the theology person and I'm the practical person. So, you know, we can tell people all day practically racism is wrong, but what does that mean from a theological perspective? When you engage in racism, what are you actually doing from a biblical perspective that's wrong? And then somebody needs to tell you, well, how not to do it and get you practice it, just like how to work out every day. You know, what are some practical things you do to get yourself to that point? So that's kind of what we plan to do, because what I really, really want to do, and this is what Michael says, we know when we had success, I want diversity, equity. I want it to be a class, a major, or something you can do. It's so common in seminaries that it's just like anything else. You can go into a seminary and you know, you go into, I don't know what, missionary. You can have a specialization in missionary. I want it to be so part mainstream. It's just part of the curriculum. You don't get a degree in pastoral leadership if you haven't taken diversity and equity classes. How could that be? How could you be a leader? You really think about it. You know, how can you be a leader in a Christian organization and not have been trained in that? And that should have been part of your curriculum. We missed that. I want to go back and do it. I wanted to be in, you know, all these Christian schools. I think, you know, you guys, everybody's homeschooled in Christian schools. That needs to be a part of the curriculum. That needs to be like learning your ABCs. And we want to be instrumental. And maybe, like you said, Matt, I'm sure somebody could, you know, you're the trailblazer and somebody comes behind you and perfect it. Mm-hmm. But that's what we want to be. And for me, it's just like, and I think Matt's heard my story, but I got into computer science in the 80s, early 80s. There were no Black females. You know, I was the only Black female in my classes. You know, my college professors looked at me like I was crazy. You know, I'd be at their, you know, 8 o'clock in the morning. What about these bits and bytes? Because this doesn't make any sense. But I was determined, I'm going to do this.
Right.
And I mean, I struggled. I got through it. I worked in IT since 80s, 90s. And lo and behold, now everybody has a computer, right? I mean, you have a phone. It's like, what the heck? This is like so, you know, we don't do anything without a computer. This is so common. That's what diversity, equity, inclusion needs to be. If we're really going to make any headways here, that's what it needs to be. And we want to bring that into fruition.
Yeah. So that is a great vision. I think I I would almost dare to say that there are people who do it on an individual level, like certain callings and certain initiatives. It wouldn't surprise me, like let's take Khan, for example, right? She's involved in those type of things. And Rose is in, what she's doing for inner city peace. But as you were talking, one of the things that really stood out to me was that you're more talking about, it's almost like what I'm doing with civil conversations, right? Like even this is how do we make conversations between different people more comfortable and normalize it, right? Because what you're talking about is making it a normal.
Normal thing. Nothing.
Because when I think about corporate America, we have this. I mean, D&I was the term, and now I know you hear more DE&I. But D&I, diversity and inclusion, has been a thing, right? And it's kind of like been trending. And then, of course, George Floyd got murdered, and through the roof. Everybody's putting billions of dollars into diversity and inclusion and equity and all this other stuff. And and if you're a minority, apply for the job because you're probably gonna get it, right? So
the church is not doing anything.
But the church is not doing it. But what's interesting is in the conversation I had with Rose on the church politics and race, Pastor. Oh my God! Now I'm having a brain fart. White pastor that I had on the show. He said that, and which the day before he actually requested that Pastor Randall had requested that I come in to help him with conversations about culture and race. Don't get me wrong, I have zero problems doing that. But what I will say is I have none of your qualifications. And I'm talking about all three of you. So like, but I'm just Matt, right? Like I'm a normal guy who just wants to help. So maybe I kind of come at it from more of a relational standpoint. But when it comes to theology and practicality, I don't have that area. Again, I'm more relational. Right, I can normalize and be like, hey, what's up, man? You're an Asian. Let's just talk about some stuff, Or hey, what's up? You're Indian. Let's talk about some stuff. That's me. That's it. Like I'm probably more of like the example of what you three try to get in place, and especially what Lisa you're trying to do. So I think that vision's awesome.
I had a pastor actually say, he kind of said the same thing to me, and I said, I don't want to offend you, but you got to do the work. I'm not doing the work. And that's the problem is, I tell this to him in love, but.
Well, make them pay you if you're going to do the work.
Well, that's the thing. I'm going to do the work, but I'm going to get paid. Yeah, that too. But stop asking me to solve your problem. Exactly. Unless you're going to pay me. Because you know what? I paid a lot of money to go to school. And you see all these books behind me. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of money and energy to collect them and read them. Now I can give you that, but there is nothing I can do but assist you, and you've got to put in the work. And if you're not willing to change and be uncomfortable and put in the work, and if you're not willing to know that it's the Holy Spirit in you that needs to work, stop asking me to help you. Now that sounds mean, but it's the truth. Do you understand? And that's where we got to get to. And I'm using working out and eating right as an example, because Matt and I have talked about that. And I can talk to Matt all day. But if I'm not going to be willing to shop differently, cook differently, put in an hour and a half a day, discipline myself, be uncomfortable, it's all for naught. And that's where we need to get to with this, racism. And you got to put in the work. And so I'm not even entertaining that I'm going to like, oh, let's have a conversation. No, you won't be all right. Because a year down the road, something else is going to happen. Something else is going to, and you want to have another conversation instead of really doing the work and that need to change you. And that's what
part of the fabric. Truly make part of the fabric of the environment. So if I can pivot, thank you, Lisa, for that. So pivot over to Khan for a second. In the same vein, like when it comes to just moving things forward, you've been doing a lot of work, controversial or not, right? You've been doing a lot of work. What is it like for you now and going into the future, right? What are the things that you're aspiring to do to move, and when I say to move things forward, it's not just about women, because we're past that. This is just you being who you are, just kind of what Lisa's talking about, being who you are and just pushing things forward. What does that look like to you in ministry and et cetera?
Yeah. Well, similar to Lisa, I am building my consulting business. I am, volunteering as much as I can in Sanctuary Covenant Church because I love it, because we are one of the churches that are well known for racial justice, and having that as, I love what Pastor Rose said in the politics one, that as the ethos of our church. So I need to be in a place where people got it, and even though it was mostly a black white mix as it started out, and a handful of Asians, that's the type of church I want to be in. So I'm an educator, I'm a teacher, a facilitator, so I'm building on that, and I've gotten a number of calls, and I'm getting a couple people who are trying to help me build this business and ministry. And it's funny because I was asked to write a foreword to a book called I Pastor Hip Hop. And if you look at me, you would not guess, well, she knows everything. There's a hip hop artist right there. You're not sit
Right.
there and think that of me, and I'm not. But this pastor was so gracious, and we have this relationship of mutual respect, that he asked me to write a foreword. And when we were doing this Facebook Zoom interview about his book, he called me afterwards and he says, Con, do you believe in prophetic words? I said, yeah, I grew up charismatic. We did it all the time, whether they ended up being true or not. He said, I just had this vision that God is going to elevate you. And I said, well, I received that. Hallelujah. Because I'm stuck with this. I feel like stuck in my university, and I need something new to happen here. And so right after that week, Matt, I got in connection with you, a couple other Facebook people.
Wow.
And then Sanctuary asked me to preach. And then a couple weeks after, I've been getting all these little small bites. I haven't quite sealed all the deals yet.
Wow.
But I'm hoping that I called Pastor Stacey. I said, it's coming true, this prophecy you had. And so I'm just hoping that it will grow, and my husband's going to build me a website. And I just need to take those little steps, because I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm not a salesperson that I'm going to say like, hey, I'm such a great person and hire me, that's just not my personality, but I do need to have a little bit of a hustle, right?
It takes big mouths like me to probably say it or something, because I have no problem just saying Con's awesome, or whatever it is. We just go from there. Or Lisa's awesome, because I think I will say this, and maybe this is God, right? Not to cut you off, because Con, I want you to continue if you can. But when I listened to what Lisa shared and what you just shared, and what I told you I've been asked to do Pastor Randall is just one. Like, there's actually a couple of churches that's brought it up. I'm not going to lie. I'm not skilled in that. Like, I have no problems being able to have a basic conversation, but I'm not a culture changer, right? Like that. I would have to be a part of the church to be a culture changer, or somebody like you guys who's willing to go in and really like dive into it in your own way. So I will just flat out just say, look, here's the deal. I got somebody on the West Coast or Midwest, and I got somebody on the East Coast. That's probably, whatever. But you guys get what I'm trying to say. Like, I'd rather, I'm glad to hear this, because it helps me feel better about when stuff comes at my way, and that there are people who are willing to truly do the work. That doesn't mean I don't want to. I just want to see the outcomes. Like, that's it. Like, I want to see the outcomes. So, Con, I'm sorry to cut you off. I just think it's great what you're saying as well.
So here I'm gonna do the little side hustle. C3consults@gmail.com.
That's okay. I want you guys to offer. Like, I want you guys.
Cultural Competency Consulting. That's what my little business and ministry is called, and I would love to. I'm more passionate of the integration of faith and race and culture. That's my, more of my passion: immigration issues, refugee issues, Asian American issues. So yeah, I'm hoping that the Lord will just grow that in me, and I'm thankful for Pastor Rose. Just wrote me a glowing endorsement, so I'm just happy to be at a church that does talk about these things. So
that's awesome. Lisa, were you about to say something?
So are you? Are you on social media, Con?
I'm on Facebook. I need to probably make a business Facebook page too. I'm not that
Well, I'll reach out to you. Look for Lisa Brown from Greensboro, North Carolina, and you, Rosa. I'll reach out to you all after this call, just so we can stay connected and we have a means of
Yes.
staying connected. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna
women.
definitely. I really do promote like people who are guests to connect, because I think it's great, because you guys can go off and do your own thing and build and so on and so forth. So Rose, as we turn the corner here, I want you to, if you don't mind sharing kind of what you got going on and what the future holds for you in ministry and where you want to take it.
Yeah. Well, right now, so I do work full time at Sanctuary as pastor of formation, and that takes a whole lot of time. And just absolutely love Sanctuary. And so as of now, feel very much called to stay there and be there and plant even deeper roots in this new role in formation. It's been just a little over a year now in that current role. 10 years total though at the church. And right now I've been working on a doctorate. So I am at Boston University in the School of Theology, and I'm working on my Doctor of Ministry. It's called Transformational Leadership. That's the name of the program. And my dissertation topic is called White Followership. And I'm trying to really move the topic of racial reconciliation forward. So, like we've already said, for the last 10, 15, 20 years even, or more, the conversation, at least within especially multi-ethnic churches, has been convincing white people that racism is real, that social justice is part of the gospel, integral to it, and really just like helping them along in their journey to awareness of this. And my hope is to move that conversation forward beyond just convincing white people that racism is real, and instead helping them to truly understand what it means to be followers of specifically in our congregation. So we are a multi-ethnic church, but we are specifically a Black-led multi-ethnic church. And so my question is, how do we, meaning me as a white person and other white congregants, follow the leadership of our African-American pastor, given the fact that we have normative dominant power, both in society and certainly in the church? So what does it mean to actually move toward what our vision is and yield that power in very practical ways? And so this concept that I'm trying to develop of white followership is an action-based, I guess, a praxis really of helping white congregants in a multi-ethnic church understand their power and make particular action steps toward yielding that. So I don't know what will happen, honestly, once I'm done with it. I've been a little almost short-sighted in the sense of necessity, because I just need to write this thing and finish it. And I'm getting so close. I hope to defend and be done in December. But certainly, I've had a few publishing companies ask me if I might write a book on it. So I hope to. And I don't know, kind of just see what happens. And again, really challenge white Christians to go further in the conversation of racial justice, because it just can't end at convincing them that it's real. It has to be tangible practices.
So thank you for sharing that. The dynamics of what you're talking about within the ministry is important, because it's almost like if I were to bring like Con and Lisa's vision, and by the way, I'm pointing to where they are from my perspective, Con and Lisa's vision, and like you would be like the equivalent of the person inside that's furthering what they're bringing from the outside in. If I said that correctly. So it's critical what you're doing overall, especially if you end up having like, and this is, I think this is almost a story for all three of us or four of us. If you have people who within your church that look at what you're doing and then they move on to another church or another ministry or another denomination, just like we all have done that at some point in time, and God calls them to hopefully carry that on, right? And you never know, they can be at another denomination and say, hey, let's bring Con or Lisa in. Let's go over here. And you need to come fix the Wesleyans, and come and fix the Episcopalians, and come and go fix the Mormons. But yeah, so but no, I think it's great because I believe it's what's necessary, and I'm looking forward to hearing the doctorate's success and journey. Actually, the journey seems like it's almost to the end. Are you saying it's by December? Is that right? Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, so I have the first draft done, and if
Yeah.
it gets all approved and through all the different formatting reviews, I hope to defend in December and be confirmed as Dr. Rose in December. We'll see. Hopefully.
Dr. Rose. And I think first off, congratulations. That is huge. One of the beautiful aspects I love about this entire conversation, and this is helping me out, is to hear some of the past, some of the recent, like present, and then hearing the future. And none of the past struggles stopped you all or stopping you all from pushing forward. If anything, it's more fuel in the tank to be like, let's keep going, let's keep going. And I think for anybody who hears this, no matter if you're male or female, you need to be able to grab on to what God has called you to do and continues to call you to do. And you never know what the pivot may be in time, and just execute. And for the women, especially the younger women or the little girls that are hearing this, if it's in ministry or if it's just in life, period, it's like, don't let anything, I mean, you don't need to be like disobedient per se, but like, don't let anything stop you from the vision that God has for you. So look, if God doesn't have a vision for you chopping up vegetables in the kitchen like Khan's family had, then you sit there in that living room and you're like, I'm not doing it. I want to ask you guys.
The true travesty of justice is that I'm in the kitchen 3 times a day. But my husband does cook over on the weekends, and he's a good cook, so I'm thankful for that.
That's awesome. So let me ask you guys this before we wrap. If there was, and you could take a second to think about it, but if there was something that you were going to say to anyone, if you want to focus on women, if you want to focus on just anybody, but obviously this is about women and in ministry, what would you say to a young woman or anybody who's, even if it's someone your age? What would you say? What words of encouragement would you give? Anybody have anything off the dome? Rose is already ready. All right.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. I would say that as I was discerning a call to ministry, I remember before I came to Sanctuary, before I accepted the call, I told my husband and I were talking about it in California, like, are you going to take it? What are you going to do? And I said, I think I'm going to accept the position, but I'm never, ever going to preach. I'm never going to do it. I'll accept the role, but I'm never going to do that, because it was literally my biggest fear. It was my biggest fear in ministry. Like, I'm going to be a pastor, yes, but I'm never, ever, ever going to preach. And Khan is probably laughing because I've preached countless times now. And now I have young women coming up to me after I preach, and they say, like, wow, it looks so effortless. Like, it is something that I'm so, self-conscious or afraid to do is to use my voice, is to speak. And I guess my encouragement would be, like, whatever your biggest fear is, if God has called you to it, not only is it probably you're going to inevitably be called to do those really hard things, but God's going to show up and use you in ways that you will never, ever imagine for yourself. That's for sure.
No, that's great. I love that. Lisa or Khan?
Yeah, can I go, because I have a story about Pastor Rose. So 3 years ago, when we decided to change churches, and I knew Sanctuary has a reputation, so I knew I wanted to go into that church because I knew it was Black led in about racial justice. And so we came, and then Pastor Rose was the one who was preaching, and I was like, wait a minute, I did not sign up to hear a white person preach at me. But when she preached, it was fire. She was talking about power and privilege and laying all that stuff down and calling out white supremacy. And I was like, dang, woman, you can preach. And you are one of my favorite preachers. So, yeah, you can preach.
Wow.
So my encouragement to people is from, or women especially, is from Acts 2:17. In the last days, God says, I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions. Your old men will dream dreams. Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my spirit in those days, and they will prophesy. So however God has gifted you, don't let people limit you. Don't let the enemy limit you, and grow in your giftings and grow in maturity to fit those giftings, because sometimes you have talent but not the maturity to match up with that, and then you're going to get in trouble. So yeah, allow God to pour out your spirit on you young women, and prophesy and teach and serve and go out there and make a difference for the kingdom.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for that, Con. And Lisa.
I just have to agree with Con, and yeah, I do. I think you have to just love the Lord, pursue the Lord, and He will speak to you. Your calling, um, guide you to where you need to be. Don't get frustrated. Don't act. Don't, some people may not accept you, but don't act in vengeance. Just, they say, shake the dust off and go where you're to go and continue to grow. If you have an opportunity to pursue your biblical education, if you can find a way, do that. And let God use you.
That's great. This is great. And so in closing, I will say, I for one believe in being an advocate for everybody, no matter what your gender is, and there are only two options. And what I learned from this, especially the age that I am, is it's beautiful to see the graduation from when women probably dealt with a lot more struggles, I guess you could say, or adversity to attain certain levels and titles and roles, depending on denominational location, et cetera, at one point, to now they are able to get those roles. But then, of course, there's still some struggles in regards to what are the things that they're now allowed to deal with when it comes to the roles and levels that they've attained, right? Maybe a doctorate, an MDiv, years in ministry, pastoral titles, et cetera, right? Whatever that may be. And I think it's important for us to see that these three women are amazing examples of identifying their calling, going through the struggle, not letting it stop them, growing, and then being able to continue to push forward. And another thing I noticed is all three of them had mentioned their husband's support. And I think that also is a huge deal. That doesn't necessarily mean that for those who are single women and stuff like that, you need to have a man before you get support. However, it's encouraging to me as a husband myself to hear how important those relationships are. So that way, even for my own wife, if she wants to start moving into this area, what I need to do for her. So I'm very appreciative of Lisa, Con, and Rose for sharing their stories with us, sharing their background, and sharing their successes, and sharing their ambitions and their future goals. And hopefully this has encouraged you all. It's encouraged me. So thank you guys for listening to another episode of Civil Conversations with Matt Aguido, Women and in Ministry. Y'all have a good one. Bye.